Welcome, everybody. Roger Durling here, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And I am so excited this morning that we have Garrett Bradley, the director of Time. The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival this past last year, January 2020. And she was the first Black woman to win Best Director in the U.S. Documentary competition. The film has won an incredible, deservedly amount of accolades, including LA Film Critics Best Documentary, New York Film Critics, amongst many other laurels. Welcome, Garrett. Again, deeply honored to have you here. I've been dying to talk.
You.
As I mentioned, I've been dying to talk to you. It's one of my favorite films in a long time. And I want to jump right in and talk about the how you blend in. You had filmed Fox at first, and then she delivered to you a bag of her own tapings, and then you had to blend in the two times, pun intended. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I had the whole time we were filming, I mean, I was under the impression that I was making another 13-minute short op doc. I had made a short film called Alone, which is where I had met Fox actually in the process of making that film. Fox is briefly in Alone and makes a really vivid connection between slavery and the prison industrial complex. And so I was sort of thinking, how can I continue the conversation around incarceration in a way that is deeply human, in a way that is rooted in the family, and that is also speaking to the effects of the facts, right? And so for me, that meant really looking at their daily ritual and routine in their life. And that was what my focus was on. And on our last day of filming, as you mentioned, I remember saying to Fox, I'll be back in a few months and I'll show you a few cuts. And she handed me what ended up being 100 hours of her own personal archive. And I like to say it was both my dream come true and my worst nightmare because, as a filmmaker, I mean, I have to say, as a filmmaker, I think so much of the beauty of what we do is honoring the present moment, finding a way to become sort of like water or like air to all of the challenges and changes that anything presents itself to you as. And so Gabe Rhodes, who cut the film, we both sat and had to say, okay, we understand that the structure and the length and maybe even the approach is going to have to change as a result of this incredible treasure trove that we have. But the intention for why I wanted to make this film must remain the same. And I feel incredibly grateful because it brought so many challenges for me, this being my first feature-length documentary film. It brought so many challenges, but I think I was able to figure out, how do I hold on to the intention and my reason for wanting to make this film amidst all of this change,
Garrett, when we see the press, I mean, well, the present, the current footage that you did, I was noticing that you shoot her from the desk, and then her past footage. Also, the camera is set up from her desk looking at her, and there's a conversation going back and forth. Was that purely coincidental, or is something that you?
Yes, it was crazy, Roger. It was cosmic. It was totally insane because I remember that was actually something. What you're pointing out is exactly what struck me immediately when I was looking at the archive, which was to say, how is it that our cameras were put in exactly the same place with me having no awareness of it at all, I mean, I think that there were so many different ways in which we had to tackle this. For me, you're pointing out something. I immediately stuck to the visual connections that one could make really clearly between the past and the present. And Gabe really pushed me to think about, yes, but how do we actually think about this in terms of story, in terms of how memory can function as something that is always simultaneous, to us, and how use the images in this really practical way. And I think for me, it was incredibly important to try to understand, as a filmmaker and an artist, I am personally really invested in what it means to tell stories in two-dimensional space, one frame at a time. That is what we're doing as filmmakers. That is what cinema is. And it, to a certain extent, is counterintuitive to the 360 degrees that life actually is, to the totality and the
Correct.
circularity of life. And so the archive presented these possibilities for filling the circle, in a lot of ways.
Which leads me to my next question, the fact that you could have, with this archival footage, you could have just done collage, but they seem to have like the circular movement. Do you know what I mean? That it seems to be flowing in one continuous flow. And was that something that when you first saw the archives, that was the way you envisioned it, but or you arrived in to that eventually?
Yeah, it was something that I would love to say, oh, I knew right away what to do. No, I mean, it was so much, it was a lot of work, and we arrived to that realization. And I think the way that we arrived to it, again, not to sound too hippy dippy, but was to go back to this question of like, why am I making this film? And for me, when I'm making documentaries, it's really important, any film actually, regardless of the genre, is to understand not just why I want to make it, but why does everyone else who's going to collaborate in this process want to make it? And that first conversation that I had with the family, with Robert included, before we even started filming, and even though Robert wasn't physically present, it was crucial that he have agency and he understood why we were making certain choices and that he had say in what we were doing, right? And I
Hmm.
remember posing the question, for you all, why do you want to make this film? And their response was, our story is the story of 2.3 million American families, and we feel that our story can offer hope. And so then I felt that my job as a filmmaker was to translate and distill what hope looked like cinematically and in actionable terms that can be registered in film in their daily life and routine. And it kind of boiled down to three things. That hope existed for them in three ways. It was their ability to stay together over the course of 21 years. It was their ability to hold on to their sense of individuality. Each one of the family members has something that they love, that they do, that's unique to themselves. And that in and of itself is a type of resistance to a system that tries to take your individuality away from you. And it was love, right? And
Correct.
none of those things are chronological, are linear. And so that allowed us to look at the archive and create what you talk about as this beautiful circularity and say, okay, the only moments we're going to pull from the archive will be ones that unequivocally speak to those three pillars, because those three pillars are who they are, and it also connects us with the intention and what this idea of hope was. So it was almost like the formula allowed for these more abstract and, as you say, circular and atmospheric things then to exist.
Hmm. And you've mentioned that there are some very powerful political issues that this documentary addresses, and including the criminal justice systems, etc. But always throughout the narrative, love and the bond that this family has together is at the forefront. Can you tell us about that approach? That yes, the other issues are being addressed and are felt, but the love of Rich and Rob is always at the forefront.
Yes. And I so appreciate you bringing that to the forefront of the conversation, because I think, for me, I'm making films not in a vacuum. I don't think any of us as filmmakers are making films in a vacuum. We're making films knowing and hoping that they will be in conversation not only with culture and with society, but also with other films, right? And I felt that, if you were to watch Ava's film 13th, right? That is
Correct.
a perfect, immaculate illustration of how the present moment, how we got to this present moment, and what kind of chronic issues our country is facing around incarceration, right? Those are the
Hmm.
facts. But I think that in order for us to, and I feel that time really stands on the shoulders of a film like 13th, right? If someone were to watch both of these films together, they would understand the totality of the experience. And so for me, I felt like I could, knowing that there are films out there like 13th, that freed me as a filmmaker to say, how can I create another entry point, another path for people to try to enter this issue that is focused on the effects of the facts? Because I think we all meet compassion. We all find a way to feel compassion in different ways because we are different people and we're coming from different places. And in some cases, the numbers are incredibly important for people to understand. In other cases, the emotionality, understanding the human experience, understanding the role that love plays in a family and what's been lost over the course of 21 years is another way in which people need to can enter the conversation. So I think my reason for it was both very practical. It was also, as a filmmaker, the best way that I felt I could tell this story and to speak to these larger systemic issues. But those issues are made up of human experiences, and I'm invested in the human experience as a filmmaker. It's not a case for innocence. It's a depiction of a human reality, you know, of what forgiveness looks like, of what time. Think about 2.3 people being incarcerated.
You mentioned entry point, and I want to bring up one of the things that I was so impressed with your cinematic choices is the way that you use Zoom as connecting us with Fox or the different characters that you're filming. There is kind of like this emotional and psychological connection that we have with the camera and the way you use it to bring us closer to the subject. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, it's funny. My very first film, I remember one of my goals was to try to create as little distinction between the camera and the viewer as possible. I wanted people to watch a film and feel as if their eye was the one that was guiding them through time and space in the story, right? And I'll never forget, actually, one of my mom's friends said she saw it in a theater. It was called Below Dreams, and she had to leave because she felt like she was going to puke the whole time because it was handheld. and I think, to be completely frank with you, for me, I was thinking, okay, I don't want that to happen when people are watching my films. What's another way that I can try to dissolve the camera, right? So that we really feel that we're engaged. And so I started experimenting with zoom lenses for that reason, out of just pure insecurity. And then it became, for me, exactly as you say, that the zoom did two things. One, it offered both context and specificity in a single frame, which for me was incredible. And I think speaks again to this challenge of working in two-dimensional space where you can only tell things one frame at a time. When you work in a zoom, then you're saying so much in one frame, in one moment, And then the other thing I felt was that when it's not just about the zoom itself, it's also, when does the zoom happen? At what pace does the zoom exist? And those then become the psychological things that you're talking about. That for me feels like the mimicking of when your eye relaxes and you start to focus. And for me, it was like palpable.
Does that also help relax the subject, like Fox, the fact that the camera is not right up front to her? Or
I mean, I think that, like, relaxing and creating a safe environment to a certain extent, I mean, having a smaller camera, having a camera that's not really close to your face, sure, those things help, right? But also, to a certain extent, it's like there's so much other energy work that needs to happen in order for someone to feel safe, that the camera is kind of secondary, actually, to creating an environment where someone feels that they can be vulnerable, And I think that has more to do with trust building between myself and the people I'm working with, knowing who I'm bringing with me, with my crew, and the energy that they're bringing to that space, There's so many different places you need to get before the camera even becomes the obstruction, in my mind.
Once you zero in on Fox, there were, I noticed that there were things that you document about her life, and there are other things that you don't. Can you tell us the things why focusing on certain aspects and
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as I was saying earlier, part of the beauty for me about making documentaries that it's such a study in honoring the present moment, because you don't have
mm-hmm,
control over anything, and you certainly don't have control over an ending. It would almost be unethical to try to determine one, right?
mm-hmm,
So the only thing you have on your day to day is your intention, why you want to make it, and then how is that informing what you're shooting and why you're shooting it every single day. And for me, going into it again, not knowing that the archive existed, not knowing what was going to happen, months from late, at the end of the film, I knew that I needed to try to show how the system unequivocally embeds itself in the daily life of incarcerated families. And there was not truly a moment in Fox's life that was not connected to this pursuit in reuniting her family. So we see her at her desk, making work phone calls, but she's also then the minute she's off the phone for work, she's calling the office, or she's calling a lawyer, or she's calling a friend. It was really important that people, I think, understood that it was a full-time job.
mm-hmm.
Also,
Okay.
it required somebody to combat the bureaucracy of the system, which I think is a huge part of her story, actually, is maneuvering through that,
When we see the archives and then we go back to and we see the whole 20-year-old span of her life, we see a metamorphosis in her. We see somebody evolve. It's almost like a revolution in her. Was that shocking when you saw the archive to see what was unfolding in front of you?
It was. I mean, there are certain things, again, I think I I've worked on projects before where I felt like there were things I knew in my heart that I was having a very difficult time proving on camera, you know? And I think with Fox, I knew that she was a brilliant free spirit, you know? And by the time I had met her, Robert, I think, had been incarcerated for 18 or 19 years, right? And she herself talks about how she had really gotten to a point of just deep frustration, and even anger, right? Of really feeling frustrated, for lack of a better phrase. And I think that she had developed armor, over herself at that point. And it was necessary armor. It was armor that the system has required of her, that the system requires of incarcerated families, to be perfect, to be exceptional in order to get even just basic forms of respect. But how in the film, for me, was I going to show why that was necessary, why the armor was necessary, and where the armor came from? The archive became such a critical part of understanding exactly what you said, that full evolution, and that full revolution within herself, where she transitions from the youthful wild Fox, Sybil, to this family matriarch, to Fox Rich. I don't think it would have been possible without the archive in the same way. It's
Hmm.
one thing to have somebody sit down in an interview and try to explain themselves. It's another thing to actually see it and be able to witness it.
Um, how you calibrate information. I was just very impressed when the fact that the crime and how it evolved. The botch robbery. We don't find out, you know, till later in the story, and at least my interpretation is that you didn't want to focus on the crime itself. We're delving into the consequences of the crime. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, I think because to a certain extent, I think getting, again, when you watch a film like 13th, you'll get a full understanding of the legal system and how what that machine is, you know? And for me, I think it was really more important to say, number one, I'm not making a case for innocence. This is not us trying to say that nobody did anything wrong. It's more to ask us to look at, as you said, the consequences and the effects of those decisions, and if they really hold up to the crime itself. You know, what in the human experience is lost? How can we as a society, as a culture, um, understand compassion, tap into compassion, and to understand the role of forgiveness as having a more just and transparent and an equal society. The
Mhm.
only way for me to get to that was to fully 100% lean into the love and the nuance that is this family, you know?
Can you talk about the music, the Ethiopian composer that you use? How did you find her? And she lives in Jerusalem, right?
She actually lives in Ethiopia, I thought, but maybe you're right. Maybe she does live in Jerusalem. I've been obsessed with trying to meet her in person. And of course during COVID it's a little bit difficult, but
Correct.
she's 96 years old. She goes by Emma Hoy. Um, and she has an incredible life. I mean, first of all, I should say that I really try to understand the sonic landscape of a film, even when I'm in the research phase of it. And with this film in particular, I really struggled. I couldn't hear anything. There was nothing that was coming to me. There was a lot of Stevie Wonder because Fox listened to a lot of Stevie Wonder, but I was having a hard time like really feeling that and identifying it. And it was another one of these cosmic things where YouTube, the algorithm, it just popped up one day and I listened to it and I fell in love with it. And then Gabe and I put it to picture and it worked perfectly. But it wasn't until I really read about who she was and her story that for me it really sealed the deal. And she, you know, came from a wealthy family in Ethiopia, was a prisoner of war, was classically trained in Western music, was a prodigy. And instead of sort of becoming famous, she went back to Ethiopia, decided to become a nun, and recorded only one album in 1963 of all years to raise money for an orphanage. And so I loved the idea of also bringing these two women together in space and time. They're both activists, they're both political leaders, they both understand that love and beauty are very practical and essential forms of resistance. And so it felt again just cosmic and inevitable, you know.
Mhm. I'm just still the fact that her biography, the fact that she became a nun and then and is she's do you know if she's still composing or
I don't know much. I mean, her foundation was incredibly generous with us and so open. I mean, and I just know that they watched the film and said, Emma Hoy grants it. It's okay. You can use the music. And it felt like she blessed the film, you know? But I'm now sort of obsessed with trying to be involved with her foundation and find ways to support them and get a better understanding of her daily life, because I think there's a lot for the world to learn from her, you know?
Garrett, prior to time, you had edited all of your films, and for a time you brought, you know, you had to work with, well, you didn't have to, but you worked with Gabriel Rhodes. You know, what was that like?
Oh, well, it was amazing because I mean, first of all, I was editing all of my own films up until this film just out of necessity, not because I wanted to. You know, I never had really the resources or space to hire somebody. But I think that was actually a blessing because I was able to develop a language for myself. Um, and but I knew that I had reached with Alone, I knew I had reached sort of a glass ceiling with my creative process, and that in order to be a better filmmaker, I needed to find a way to support opening up the collaborative process. And Concordia Studios, actually, they had started a fellowship as I was in the midst of making this film. And it was really like life-changing because they just came to me and said, what do you need? And I was very fortunate to know what I needed. Not everyone always, you don't always know what you need when the offer is there, you know. And I feel really lucky that I knew how to answer that question. I said, I need an editor. And Gabe I had seen working, he had made a documentary about MIA, which I had seen at Sundance a few years prior, and also looks at, you know, a really strong woman, matriarchal woman who has an incredible archive, personal archive, is politically engaged, is an artist, is a public person, right? Public persona. So I knew that Gabe understood this, would be able to really tackle the themes and all of the different sort of complexities of what we were dealing with. Um, and I have to say, I mean, I learned a lot from working with him. He and I think very differently in a certain kind of way. And those differences helped us be better, helped to make the film better. I lean towards image making and abstraction. He leans towards backbone story beats, you know, and I think we were able to really learn from each other and elevate the work. And and we both, you know, I gave him as much space as possible to really be with the material. um and then once we were both on the same page, we both watched everything backwards and forwards a million times, then we came together and started to create parameters and talk through themes and really just dig into it. And I was incredibly lucky and fortunate to have the space to be able to do that um, with him, and to have a team of people who understood our creative process and what we needed to do, you know.
So you chose to keep the film in black and white, and I understand on the surface that the black and white was helping you to bridge, you know, the old footage with the current footage, but there is far more lyricism to and different levels to the black and white. You know, I'd love to hear you, you know, talk about the usage of black and white.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's funny because I every project I've made in the past few years has sort of fallen into itself, you know. I made a short 30-minute silent film called America, which the parameters around that for me were very much about how can I, as a contemporary filmmaker, push myself by limiting the sort of toys and technology that I have to make films to early turn of the century cinema, right? So I knew it needed to be silent. I knew it needed to be on film because it's the longest archive. Film still can last 500 years, and no hard drive can promise that at all. And I knew it needed to be in black and white. And that, when, you know, I worked on that project for about 6 years, so I started making other things around the same time. And I know this sounds really silly, but I really couldn't see in color. Like when I was conceiving other projects, my mind was just seeing in this grayscale and in black and white. And so that's why Alone is in black and white. I wish I had a deep reason for why it was in black and white, but it really was almost superficial in that sense. And then because Time in my mind was a sister film to Alone, something that I hope these two films are always going to be in dialogue with each other and will always exist to one another, I knew Time needed to be in black and white. But it's funny because the archive was in beautiful, rich color.
Oh, it
Um,
was.
it was incredible. It was gorgeous, and we experimented with it being in color quite a bit, right? But it actually wasn't until until I knew we were going to work with Emma Hoy's music, that I knew we had to go back to black and white, because the music, it almost felt like you were jumping from stone to stone, because you could really feel the difference in materiality and texture between the archive and our footage, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and because so it was incredibly important for us that the themes, which I said are not chronological, right, allow us to move forwards and backwards at the same time. It became very difficult. You could really physically feel that happening with the color, right? And then when you added the music, it was like way too much going on. So to a certain extent, the music helped then reinforce, okay, we need to go to black and white. It becomes the saran wrap around the film. And we're going down a river. We're not hopping from one stone to the next. And it allowed us to hold that incredible score in my mind as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've always found color to be somewhat distracting. You know, there's a purity to black and white, and also it makes me focus on the composition and also on the themes far more. So I was I loved just your choice.
Yeah. I think Yoshi Yamamoto says exactly what you said. Where he makes the clothing in black and white because you can see the shape of them better.
hmm Yeah, and it becomes, in a way, is like you start your film has so many layers to it thematically and
Mm,
things to think about. And I think the black and white focuses on you on, in that frame of mind that we're in a far more poetic world here.
mhm.
Um, it's a very powerful film. Now, the phone call, which is so intimate and so heartbreaking. The phone call, where she's waiting for the judge to decide, and then you pan to her son. Can you tell us about shooting that? And that what was it like? I mean, I know that you're supposed to keep an objectivity, but what was it for you to be behind the camera and watch that sequence unfold?
Yeah, I mean, um, it's so funny because I think that compassion, which I know is a word I'm using a lot, but having compassion and being connected with people doesn't mean that you can't be objective, And I think
Mhm.
that we kind of are functioning right now in society with the assumption that to feel something, to have empathy, means that you're not being fair, that you're leaning into one side, or whatever. And so I think, like, for me, when I was shooting, I felt very emotionally connected to the family. I mean, I still do, and I wanted the same things that they wanted for themselves. I wanted to see Robert come home. I understood how frustrating it was to have to make phone call after phone call and to not have people take you seriously, to have people underestimate you. Um, to make things sort of intentionally complicated, to not be able to be human. I mean, you think about going to Whole Foods and having to wait too long at it's something, I'm sorry to just for a second, but it's like, especially with COVID, I find you go to the grocery store and everybody is so uptight and kind of rude to one another. And it's like, but I mean, imagine the stakes are really not that high, guys. Like, we're all at Whole Foods getting really overpriced food. It could be worse,
Yeah.
and you see what Fox has to go through and the patience that she has to have, and being polite against all odds. So it was visceral for me. I did feel incredibly connected to her in the process of that. But I also knew as a filmmaker that showing it, witnessing it, bearing witness to it, was the best way that I could support her and to support that story, their story. And so there were many, many, many moments like that, you know?
Yeah, no, there is. I mean, there is the in the church where she has to make amends to her family and to her church and apologize for what she's done. The graduation of her son. There's some really emotional and things that we witness in the film. Those things. So there was, after you got the archival footage, nothing, you didn't go back and shoot anything else. You just worked with what you already had and what she gave you.
Actually, we did go back because and for me, I don't, when I've stopped filming, it doesn't mean my relationship with people stops, right? So I knew
Correct.
that there was a hearing coming up. And I don't remember what point we were really in the edit. I mean, I think Gabe and I were still like really like swimming through it and trying to figure out like what we were doing and how it was going to exist. And I knew that a hearing was coming up, and so I went back to Louisiana for about 3 weeks to film what ended up being his release. And I was there.
Wow.
I sat in on the hearing. We weren't allowed to film that, but I was there myself, and our camera person Zach, I believe, was there to just show support as family and friends, which is what you do during hearings. And then in reality, I mean, Robert was granted parole. But then it was at least a week and a half until he actually was released. And Fox went back to the phone every day. Can you give me any information on, like, when is he supposed to be released? What is happening? Right. It was just the bureaucracy continued. And at that point, I think it was important that we, cut to the chase and and give people the relief and give people that feeling of success that Fox felt when he did come through the gate. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, we didn't know. I mean, really, it was the ending really kind of was quite elusive for a very long time in the process.
And of course, Fox has seen the documentary. What was her impression, and what did she share with you when she saw it?
Well, Concordia were very kind in allowing us to watch the film all together
Oh,
before
wow.
we premiered it, which was important to me to get their blessing and have them see it before the rest of the world did, you know. And I just remember us sitting together and holding hands and watching the film, and it still makes me very emotional. It's very emotional. Fox herself had not seen that footage since she had shot it in the 90s. And Robert obviously had not seen it at all. And, you know, I was incredibly grateful that they appreciated that they blessed the approach that I took in telling their story. Um, and and then we went to Sundance, and that's when the rest of the family, all of the sons, were there, and they watched the film for the first time. Also, had not seen any of the archive, and I'll never forget. I'll never in my life forget just that premiere night of all of us being together on stage, um, because it wasn't just about premiering the film. It was also about saying to the world, we need to have a more nuanced conversation around incarceration. We need to be more loving people. You know, we need to have forgiveness as a daily ingredient in our life in the way that we interact with each other. And to think about cinema as a really effective tool for being able to do that.
Um, I just want to clarify something that you mentioned. So Robert had not seen any of the archival footage that. But see, when I was watching it, I was always in the understanding that she was recording this to send to him so he could see the things that he was missing, the birthday parties, the graduations, etc. So she was just recording it and keeping it.
Yes, because he it was for him, certainly. It was also for her, I think, you know, in many ways as a form of therapy. But no, there was no way for him. She couldn't send a mini tape to Angola, and they weren't going to facilitate, hey, your wife sent you a tape, you want to watch it. I mean, they don't there's you can barely get a pencil, you know, or anything
Correct.
into a prison. So no, I mean, and again, it's a testament to her creating her own archive. But in my mind, it's also the thing that's so incredible to me is Fox as a person, her complete lack of doubt. You know, doubt is something that I think leads most of us, you know, that we're constantly combating that feeling of doubt inside of us just to move through the world, you know. And she did not have any doubt that he would see that, you know. It's part of the
Wow.
manifesting process. Hmm.
Well, that makes it even more. I'm gonna have to go back now, and it just makes it even more powerful because I was always on the understanding that she was documenting it, but then sharing it with him somehow. But the fact that the resilience, the commitment, the dedication of documenting all of this, and just safekeeping it for at some point him, and then what a gift you've done, to put this together, which leads me to the question that the fact that, and I alluded to it first when at the beginning of the conversation that, yes, this is a very impactful political issue that you deal with your documentary, but at the same time, Garrett, the way you film and the way you've put together your film, you are expanding, the medium, our idea of what is possible in nonfiction filmmaking. When you were making the film, were you aware of that, expanding the way nonfiction filmmaking is normally done?
Wow. Well, I first of all, I have goosebumps here. You say that it's like such an incredible honor to think that I'm able to contribute something to the field in that way. Um, I don't think that I have ever in my life thought I'm gonna do something different, to be honest with you. I think that certainly, as I talked about the focusing on effects, right, versus facts, and that we have a lot of evidence of facts, but not so much of the effects. Formally speaking, I'm kind of, I feel guided in this more higher way, and I know that sounds again also hippy dippy. I'm just going to be that person, but I really feel guided, and I think when I first started making films when I was in high school, um, and this is a very gendered experience, but like all the guys were really good at like coming together and working together, helping each other out to make films. And the girls, we were like far more independent. I had to find a way to figure out how to make things by myself, and that challenge allowed me to figure out my eye, to be confident, and to find a way to communicate and to share my curiosity. And I think that then I went to film school, and I wanted to learn at UCLA. I wanted to learn what's the tradition, what's the history that I'm wanting to be a part of. And there were certain mechanics, certain rules, cinematic rules that I could not do. And maybe it's because I'm really dyslexic that I just could not like figure it out, but I ultimately had to say to myself, okay, these rules are here so that I can understand what I'm a part of, but it doesn't mean I need to fit into that box. And I think I've been incredibly grateful that people have seemed to have responded well to something that is the only way I know how to do it. It's the only way that I know how to make films. If I tried to make it another way, it would not be good, you know? And so that's the most that I can say is I'm kind of like doing my best, and I'm glad that people can enjoy it.
And given what in my last question, given what we're experiencing and this past summer with the Black Lives Matter movement, what would you like, you know, the audience out there to get out of your film, which is so incredibly urgent right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is, over the summer, the thing that was just so incredible was this sort of unprecedented white allyship that we were seeing for the movement, and people saying, "What can I do? What do I need to do? How can I participate in making change in our country?" And I think as an artist and as a filmmaker, what became abundantly clear for me as a human being, but also within the context of knowing that we were releasing this film in 2020, was that optics and the ability to see are critical forms of resistance. It speaks to Emmett Till's mother, of her understanding how images hold systems accountable. It speaks to the Vietnam War, of how being able to see what's going on inspires protest, right? And it then should further highlight the fact that the prison industrial complex is invisible by design. We have such little evidence of what 2.3 million people looks like, where they are, what those prison systems look like, and that is on purpose. And so I think in many cases, the only evidence of entire communities that have become invisible, the only evidence of them is in the family, is in those that are serving time on the outside. And so I think that thinking about 2020, thinking about Black Lives Matter, what can we do? What do I feel motivated by? I feel motivated by the ability to make seen what is unseen, to think about images
Mm.
and the power of the image as a way of creating change.
Wow. Well, Garrett, it was a great honor to chat with you. I told you before we went on that you were the one person I've been dying to talk to for all the films this past year. And congratulations on all the success. And I can't wait to meet you in person at some
I know, me
point.
too.
Thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Be safe. Thanks for all your beautiful questions.
Okay, ciao.
Okay, ciao.